Hi, I'm Jim Bearden, and this is Lesson 11 in Leadership at the Points of Contact, a series of short videos that I have put together to help you become more effective in the roles you play as an organizational leader. In this section of the program, we're looking at one of those roles, and that is to expand and enhance employee engagement or employee participation in crucial organizational processes. In the previous lesson, we agreed that employee engagement is a hot topic today, that based on statistics, the levels of employee engagement are relatively low. And one of the explanations that's offered for these low levels of employee engagement are the generational differences between members of the staff, the multi-generational workforce, as cited as a key contributor to the low levels of employee engagement. But we also saw and agreed, I think, that workforces have always been diverse. There have always been multi-generational workforces, and in spite of that, successful organizations have had leaders who found ways to transcend those differences, to transform factions into functional teams. And we concluded our last lesson by agreeing that one of the things that such leaders have done and continue to do is to understand and deliver the value being sought by their employees, or as I put it, understanding their definitions of value. Now, starting with the next lesson, we're going to be looking at 4 specific types of questions that you can use for achieving that level of understanding. But before we get to that, I want to share with you 4 premises on which I'm basing this whole notion of value, of understanding their definition of value, and to see if this makes sense to you. The first premise: the only reason your employees will do the things you expect them to do is if they believe they will receive sufficient value to justify their doing so. Okay? Now that doesn't just apply to employees, it's us as well, right? That we choose to do or not to do things based on the expected return. Is it consistent with my values, or am I going to receive sufficient remuneration to justify me doing that? That the only reason, and I mean that, the only reason that they'll do the things that we expect them to do is if they believe they will receive sufficient value to justify their doing so. Now, with that as the stake in the ground, here's number 2. Every one of your employees has his or her own somewhat unique definition of value, and those definitions change. Now, let's look at that one for just a minute. When I say they have their own somewhat unique, that doesn't mean that they don't have some characteristics in common. As a matter of fact, I think you'll probably discover that many, if not most of your employees, share some characteristics or some examples of value that they're looking for. But here's where you can get into trouble. If you start treating each of their definitions of value as if they were the same, you are essentially sending them a very, very bad message, because in their minds, their definitions are unique to them. The third premise or basic truth here is the only way you can know how, or even if you can deliver the value they're seeking, is by understanding their definition of value. Now think about this for a minute. Too often what happens in organizational settings, efforts are made to incent people to higher levels of performance, either vis-a-vis contests or bonuses or things like that. And every one of these things, well, I say every one, most of these are based purely on assumption. The assumption is that what we're offering you as an incentive has sufficient value to justify your raising your level of performance. Or we're assuming that you're capable of higher levels of performance. You understand that the reason that so many of these incentive programs fall flat is because they don't relate directly to what employees see as having value, certainly not sufficient value. And finally, the fourth premise: in order to understand their definition of value, the only way to ensure that you understand it is to have them explain it to you. So where leadership is concerned, particularly where leadership designed to, again, to expand and enhance employee engagement is concerned, there's a real good chance that what I'm going to be suggesting that you do varies somewhat from what you might have expected. Because as I see it, leadership is a whole lot more about asking and listening than it is about issuing orders. The only way to ensure that you understand your employee's definition of value is to have them explain it to you. Let's look at the action items for this week's lesson. Number one, I want you to think of the employee who you see as least productive in your organization, one who seems to consistently underperform. Number two, I want you to answer the following questions about that employee. One, what are some of the things you and other members of your leadership team have done to encourage that employee to perform better? And how has that worked for you if they're still underperforming not very well? Number two, how would you describe that employee's definition of value? The things that employee sees as having sufficient value to justify the things you expect that employee to do. And number three, how many conversations have you had with that employee about his or her definition of value? Answer those questions honestly. These questions, and all of the questions that you'll see in the action items at the end of each lesson, are designed to help you adapt and apply the lesson to your organizational situations and the leadership opportunities you encounter. And I strongly encourage you to complete those action items.